My name is Clara, and this is something I've carried inside me for a very long time. I'm not proud of it. In fact, some nights I wish I could erase that memory completely. But the truth is, silence has been heavier than guilt. Maybe sharing it will finally set me free. Or maybe it will remind someone out there how dangerous loneliness can be. It all began on a Friday night concert. The kind my husband loved more than anything. Loud music, flashing lights, and a crowd that never stopped moving. He was at the bar that night, laughing with his friends, while I sat at our table, pretending to enjoy myself. I remember staring at him, the way he smiled, carefree, completely unaware that I was there, feeling invisible beside him. His friends were there too, charming, confident, the kind of men who always knew what to say. One of them caught me looking, smiled, and raised his glass. I smiled back without thinking. And that tiny gesture became the first crack in the wall I thought would never break. Looking back now, I see how innocent it seemed. Just a smile, just a moment. But that's how it always starts. You don't notice when the line starts to fade until it's gone. That night was supposed to be just another concert, but it became the beginning of a secret I still struggle to forgive myself for. Before that night, I used to think my marriage was unbreakable. We had been together for 5 years, 5 long, quiet years. My husband was a good man, hardworking, responsible, but somewhere along the line, we stopped being us. He became a provider, and I became a presence, someone he saw every day, but barely noticed anymore. I used to wait for him to come home, to ask how his day was, to touch my hand and smile like he used to. But the conversations faded into silence, and silence became our language. We still shared the same bed, but it felt like we were sleeping on different islands. His friends were the opposite of him, loud, playful, full of life. They often came around on weekends, and though I didn't admit it then, I liked when they did. They made me laugh, they asked questions, noticed small things, like when I changed my hair, or when I wore something new. It was harmless at first. At least, that's what I told myself. Sometimes, I'd catch one of them looking at me a bit too long. Sometimes, I didn't look away fast enough. I told myself it was just friendly attention, that I missed being seen, not being desired. But attention is a dangerous thing when your heart is starving for it. It feeds you just enough to make you forget what hunger really means. So when my husband suggested we all go to that concert together, I didn't see a warning. I saw an escape, a night to feel alive again. The night of the concert started with excitement. I spent hours getting ready, more effort than I'd made in a long time. I didn't know why I cared so much. Maybe I wanted my husband to notice me again. Maybe I wanted him to see that I could still make heads turn. He was in a good mood that evening. I remember him humming in the car as we drove there, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. For a moment, I thought maybe things were changing. Maybe tonight would be different. But when we arrived, he quickly drifted toward the bar, where his friends were already waiting. The music was loud, pulsing through the floor and into my chest. Colored lights flashed over the crowd like waves, washing everything in red and blue. My husband laughed with his friends, clinking glasses, joking loudly, and I stood there beside him, smiling at people who barely looked at me. At first, I tried to pull him back. I touched his arm, leaned close to whisper something, but he just nodded, distracted. One of his friends, Daniel, noticed and said, "Come on, Clara, don't just stand there, dance with us." I hesitated. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile, but he laughed and extended his hand anyway. "You used to love dancing. I saw you at that wedding last year, remember?" My husband didn't say anything. He just smiled faintly and turned back to his drink. That silence felt like a green light, though I didn't realize it then. So I let Daniel pull me onto the dance floor. The music was wild, the kind that made you forget your thoughts. The crowd pressed close, the air thick with heat and perfume. Daniel spun me around, making me laugh despite myself. For a few minutes, I forgot about my husband sitting at the bar. I forgot about everything except the rhythm, the flashing lights, and the fact that someone was finally looking at me again. Then another friend, Marcus, joined us, shouting over the music. He was the playful one, always teasing, always smiling too wide. "You're glowing tonight, Clara," he said, laughing. I rolled my eyes but couldn't stop smiling. When the song ended, we were all breathless. Daniel offered me his drink, and though I don't usually drink much, I took a sip. Then another. The burn in my throat felt strangely comforting. One song turned into 5, then 10. My husband didn't come to check on me once. When I looked his way, he was laughing with a group of people, completely absorbed in his own world. A small voice inside me whispered, "He doesn't care. He doesn't even see you." That voice grew louder with every passing minute. At one point, Marcus leaned close and said something I barely heard. I think it was a compliment, or maybe a confession. I laughed it off, but he didn't move away. The space between us disappeared, and I didn't step back. I wish I had. When I finally told Daniel I needed a break, he offered to walk me to the restroom. I remember hesitating, glancing toward the bar. My husband was still there, his back turned. So I said yes. The hallway behind the main hall was quieter, dimly lit, with the music muffled behind closed doors. My head felt light from the drink, and my thoughts were foggy. Daniel kept talking, telling jokes, making me laugh. Then Marcus appeared again. I didn't even notice he'd followed. I don't remember the exact sequence of moments after that, just flashes. Laughter that didn't feel like mine. Compliments that felt too close. A line that blurred faster than I could understand. At some point, I realized things had gone too far. I remember saying stop, maybe once, maybe twice, but my voice was small, drowned out by the music echoing through the walls. Afterward, I just stood there, staring at the floor, my hands shaking. The air smelled like alcohol and sweat. I felt dirty, broken, and confused, not just by what they'd done, but by how I'd allowed the night to reach that point. When I finally walked back to the main hall, the concert was almost over. My husband was exactly where I'd left him, still at the bar, still smiling. He looked at me and asked, "Where have you been?" I froze. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to scream, cry, or disappear. But I just smiled weakly and said, "Bathroom." He nodded, unconcerned, and turned back to finish his drink. That moment broke something inside me completely. I realized I could stand right next to him, shattered and trembling, and he would never see it. He didn't ask why my hands were shaking. He didn't notice that I could barely breathe. On the drive home, we sat in silence. The city lights slid across my face, like ghosts. He talked about how good the band was, how much fun his friends had. I nodded, pretending to listen, while my mind screamed. When we got home, I showered for an hour, scrubbing until my skin burned. I thought it would wash away the memory, the smell, the shame. But it didn't. It only made me feel emptier. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. He looked peaceful. I wanted to hate him for not noticing my pain. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been disappearing for a long time, long before that night. And maybe this was the final consequence of being unseen for too long. When dawn came, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My heart felt heavy with something I couldn't name. Guilt, anger, regret, all tangled together. I thought about what had happened, about what I had allowed to happen. And I realized something terrifying. Even if I told him, even if I confessed everything, it wouldn't undo it. It wouldn't change how I felt inside. That night at the concert didn't just ruin my trust in others. It destroyed my trust in myself. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and no amount of apologies could rewrite what happened behind those doors. And that's when I knew. The woman who walked into that concert was gone. The one who came out would never be the same again. The morning after the concert felt unreal, like waking up from a dream I didn't want to remember but couldn't forget. The sun was already high, yet the room felt cold. My head throbbed, my thoughts scattered, and for a few seconds I couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. I turned and saw my husband sleeping peacefully beside me. His calm breathing filled the silence, and something inside me broke. How could the world still look the same when everything inside me had changed overnight? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror across the room. My face looked tired, my eyes swollen. I tried to smile, to convince myself that it was just another morning. But the person staring back at me felt like a stranger. When my husband woke up, he smiled faintly and said, "You look tired. You must have danced a lot last night." I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, maybe too much." He kissed my forehead and walked out to make coffee, completely unaware of the storm inside me. The day passed like a blur. Every sound, every word felt distant. I replayed the night in my head, not the actions, but the emotions. The loneliness, the confusion, the numbness. I tried to find a moment where I could have stopped everything, where I could have made a different choice, but the lines were too blurred. By evening, guilt had settled into my chest like a stone. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to confess everything, to scream and cry and let it all out. But when he sat beside me on the couch, talking about work and laughing at something on TV, I couldn't. I just nodded, pretending to listen, my heart heavy with secrets. For days I lived like that, quiet, distant, trapped in my own thoughts. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man I once loved and the life I had helped shatter. I hated myself for craving attention, for mistaking it for love, for not walking away when I could have. I stopped meeting his eyes, I stopped talking as much, and though he noticed the silence growing between us, he never asked why. Maybe he thought it was just another phase. Maybe he didn't want to know. At night, when the house was dark, I'd lie awake and whisper apologies into the silence. Apologies he would never hear. Apologies I didn't know who to give to him, to myself, or to the version of me that still believed she was unbreakable. Weeks passed, but the heaviness never left. Some mornings, I'd wake up and almost forget. Then I'd see him smile, and the guilt would come rushing back. A reminder that love can survive betrayal, but it can never forget it. One evening, I found myself standing by the window, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. And for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not just for what happened, but for everything that led to it. For the silence, for the distance, for the desperate need to be seen. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't undo the past, but I could stop hiding from it. I needed to confront what I felt, the shame, the fear, the anger, instead of letting it consume me. So I began writing, not for forgiveness, but for clarity. Every word hurt, but every sentence made it easier to breathe. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from finally facing the truth, the ugly, painful, honest truth. And as I wrote the last line, I realized something I wish I had known that night. Loneliness can whisper lies that sound like comfort, but it never truly fills the emptiness inside. I don't know what pushed me to finally speak. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the weight of silence. Weeks had passed, and my heart felt like a locked room. Every time my husband smiled at me, it was another reminder of what I had lost: honesty, peace, and the sense of being whole. I remember sitting alone one afternoon, the house quiet except for the ticking clock. I held my phone in my hand, thinking about calling someone, a friend, a counselor, anyone, but the words refused to come. Who could understand something I barely understood myself? So instead, I pressed record on my voice notes. That was how it started. My first confession. My voice trembled as I said my name. It sounded small, unfamiliar. "I'm tired of pretending," I whispered. "I'm tired of waking up every morning and feeling like I'm someone else." Tears came, but I didn't stop. I talked about the loneliness that had crept into my marriage like a shadow, about how easy it is to lose yourself when you start craving the smallest bit of attention. How a moment of weakness can change everything you once believed about who you are. It wasn't an excuse, it was the truth. I talked about my husband, how he used to make me laugh, how his touch once felt like home, and how somewhere along the way, we both stopped trying. The silence between us had become a third person in our marriage, whispering doubts and feeding distance. When I finished recording, I listened back to my voice. It didn't sound like someone wicked, just broken, someone who made a mistake and had no idea how to fix it. That night, I walked into our bedroom and looked at my husband. He was reading, glasses halfway down his nose, the same calm expression he always had. I almost spoke, my lips parted, the words sitting on the edge of my tongue, but I couldn't. The truth felt too heavy to drop into the fragile peace we had left. So instead, I whispered a different kind of confession. Not to him, but to God. For the first time in weeks, I prayed, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. I asked for the strength to face myself without running away. I asked for healing, even if it had to come through pain. And slowly, something began to change inside me. I started journaling every day. I started taking long walks, rediscovering the parts of me that existed before marriage, before mistakes. I read about boundaries, about emotional neglect, about how people lose connection long before they realize it. One thing became clear: betrayal doesn't always start with hate. Sometimes it starts with emptiness, with wanting to feel alive when you've gone numb. I never told my husband what happened that night. Some people might call that cowardice, others might call it mercy. But I chose silence not to protect myself, but to avoid destroying what little was left. I focused on rebuilding myself instead, piece by piece, quietly. Months later, something unexpected happened. One evening, he sat beside me on the couch, turned off the TV, and said, "Clara, I don't know what's changed, but I miss you. I want us to try again." I looked at him and saw sincerity, maybe even pain, in his eyes. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe that healing could still happen, even after the ugliest truths. We began talking again, slowly, awkwardly, honestly. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Now, as I record this confession for Alice Stories, I'm not telling it to justify myself or to make anyone pity me. I'm telling it because silence can destroy you faster than any mistake ever will. Because someone out there is standing where I once stood, lonely, unseen, tempted by attention that feels like love. To that person, I want to say this: don't trade your peace for a moment of being noticed. Don't let loneliness convince you that compromise is connection. What happened that night will always be a scar. But scars aren't proof of weakness. They're proof that you survived. And maybe, just maybe, surviving is the first step toward forgiveness. If there's one thing I've learned from everything that happened, it's that love doesn't die in a single moment. It fades quietly when two people stop seeing each other. My mistake was not the night itself, but all the nights before it, when I stopped fighting for connection and started accepting silence as normal. I share this not to seek forgiveness, but to remind someone listening that loneliness can become its own kind of trap. It whispers, "You deserve more," until you start looking for it in the wrong places. Healing didn't come quickly for me. It came through honesty, not with others, but with myself. It came through learning to face my reflection without turning away. If you've ever felt unseen, I want you to know, attention is not love, and escape is not peace. True healing begins the moment you stop running from your own truth. Because sometimes, the hardest confession isn't the one you make to others, it's the one you finally make to yourself.